Welcome to the SG Remix Podcast. I'm Water Elemental, and today I am joined by my friend BelTheSheep.
Hey there.
Introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Belier. I recently have started doing a lot of streaming stuff, but I'm sort of a returning member from some of the recorded works that we've done before. So just sort of trying something a little new, and glad to be here.
Yeah, of course. Whenever I can get someone to record with me, it's either him, What Do, Jolly Green, or Axis. So I'm glad I could grab you onto this new podcast format, because you've been on a couple of the old League podcasts. I remember that much.
Yeah, I've been on a couple of legal podcasts. It's been a long time, actually. I think the last one I was on was when Wukong still came out.
Oh my god,
that was a
long time ago.
Yeah, it's been some time.
Dude, I don't, they're getting into the worlds right now, and I kind of I'm like, alright, I'm ready to get into the worlds, and I saw the stuff that they want to do for it. I'm like, I got out of the game at the right time. Like, what the hell are they doing?
Yeah, I haven't played the game in a really long time, but I have been watching streamers play it recently, particularly Fairlight Excalibur. He's a really funny dude, and he's been kind of, he's actually one of the new players to the game. He started less than 2 months ago, and he's actually pretty good at it. He's in silver already, so this is a lot of fun.
I had to work to get into silver, dang it.
I got into gold season 2, and that's basically where I stopped.
I got ripped off. I was in gold, and then I was trying to do placements, and then my placements put me at bottom silver, and I was like,
ouch.
God. So, but yeah, enough about the good old days of League season 2.
Right? That's a long time ago.
So yeah, you said you're streaming. What kind of stuff are you playing recently?
These days I've been playing a lot of Guild Wars 2, because I'm preparing for the new expansion coming out. I've also been playing some World of Warcraft, dealing with patch 7.3 that just came out. And just some little games here and there. I was playing Dead Cells, which is a fun little platformer roguelike game, and playing Gigantic, which unfortunately doesn't get the attention that it needs from its player base, but it's a fun MOBA style game that's more about arena combat than it is more about lanes and stuff like that.
So I think I did watch a little bit of your stream. That's the one with the really kind of pretty art style to it.
Yeah, right? It's much more cartoony and much more stylized than I think a lot of other games are.
Right. So I'm kind of worried about it because it's entering late into the MOBA lifespan. The kind of everybody wants to do MOBA phase last year has kind of oversaturated the market, and I think this game would do really well, except for everybody's in the burnout right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's kind of one of those games where, like I said, it doesn't get the attention that it deserves, and I do think that for a free-to-play game, it's pretty fantastic. I think it's right up there with the levels of Smite and other stuff. It might need some, balancing changes, but honestly, all the characters are interesting, the designs are interesting, the combat's fun and fast, which is a lot that you can't say about some of the other MOBA knockoffs. Plus, it's just a nice different take on it when you've got the 3D combat where it's sort of more hack and slash style, but with actual strategy that goes into MOBAs that you'd expect. But yeah, it's unfortunate because it'll never see really too long of a lifespan, I think. But it seems like games these days are kind of having that problem. I was talking with another friend a little while ago, and he was mentioning how games like Battleborn and games like Lawbreakers are both having very terrible retainment of players, despite the fact that at least Lawbreakers is new, but they just can't seem to compete. They can't seem to find their ground, despite being what a lot of people consider to be good games.
What's interesting is I think Battleborn got so much worst case scenario. They came out the same week as Overwatch, which hurt them immensely, and then immediately after they had they just had a really shaky launch. They had kind of, a lot of people were upset with how their leveling up structure and stuff was. The single player content wasn't enough for a lot of players. Yeah. And most of the people they're aiming towards was the Borderlands people. So the Borderlands people went in for this co-op experience. They got a first person shooter MOBA, and they're like, we're out. And then you have the Gearbox fanatics who are like, it's a great game. But then you had people just kind of trickling out to the other games that were doing things better.
Yeah, it was really poor timing, the fact that Overwatch came out at that time. And if I remember correctly, even when they went free to play, there was a big game update or a big game that just came out during that time. It might have been For Honor or something like that. But there was no way that they could compete. And it's just been kind of a downhill slope for them, unfortunately. I have never actually played the game myself, but I've heard heard good things about it. So it's just
I personally wasn't a fan of the game. I did a couple of videos on the dungeons. They were fun. They were kind of goofy. I wasn't a fan of the multiplayer, the kind of meat of the game, and I wasn't a fan of the progression. And so I was like, I kind of backed away from it before the game's launched. Now I've seen other people play it. I've watched some streams. I've watched some gameplay, and it's a fun game to watch. I just don't think it's my kind of game personally.
And that's absolutely fair. But it like another example that I used was like Lawbreakers that just recently came out. I think it came out a month ago, maybe a little bit more. And it's seen such a huge drop-off. They were showing me statistics of something like 69 players total on Steam playing it. I mean, it was really low player output. So I guess it just... Some of these games don't work out, and it's unfortunate that they really are just entering a saturated market. And it seems like they just can't find their footing, which happens.
Yeah, currently on SteamCharts.com, the last 30 days, it had a peak of 830 players.
Yeah.
Like, the highest they got was like 7,000 in June, and that was right before launch.
Right, and so I don't know what necessarily causes it. I mean, we've got other games that just explode out of nowhere, like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds just exploded and went over, 1 million users at like one concurrent point, and it's hit number one on Twitch for streaming views very consistently. I think the only things that ever really go over it are tournament plays and maybe League of Legends, but it's usually in the number 1 or number 2 slot. So it's... I don't know. Right now it's at the number 1 slot with 80,000 viewers, which, even League of Legends has only 69,000. It's still got 10,000 viewers more. It's just one of those things where right place, right time, or maybe it's just the best version of a current game. Maybe that's the other thing, is that the games that come out, like Gigantic or Lawbreakers or Battleborn, it's not that they're bad games so much as they're just not the peak games. They're not at their best as comparatively to other games, and so they just don't get the attention.
Yeah, I definitely see that, and it's just interesting because, like, Lawbreakers was one of those games that I heard a lot about. It was like, every time there'd be a PAX or, any sort of convention, it was there, and it was on the floor, and then people got to play it, and they're like, it was a fun game. But I think it spent too long in development, and it had too many eyes on it, so by the time it actually released, people were like, yeah, it's out, but cool.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with any game that spends too long on the con circuit, like, get the game out there, make it early access, do something with it. I just think they waited too long on it.
Yeah, I mean, this seems to be a fairly big problem for a lot of these multiplayer games that are coming out recently, is that it's really hard to keep the attention span of players unless you've got something that really offers a lot to it. A lot of it comes down to the community, but in terms of its content, you really need to have something special that no other game is doing well. And if you don't have that, then you're just not going to make it, even if your game is actually good.
Yeah, definitely. And I was probably going to check it out, but seeing the player peaks, and it's just that's already kind of like I don't want to invest into a game that's, that's not going to... It's going to be Brink all over again. I don't know if you ever played that when it came out.
Well, and that's the thing, with like Gigantic as well, is since I've been playing that, I've tried to, get multiple friends into it just to check it out and look at it. And their responses are typically the same thing, which is that they don't want to invest in a game that they don't know will last long enough to make their investment worth it. Yeah.
And that's how I felt even with PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds when it first was like starting to pick up. I'm like, I don't know, this could be another Player's DayZ, or it's not going to get any more people on it. And then it kept growing and growing. I'm like, well, I'm going to hop onto this before this giant bubble bursts. And so that one I was kind of safe to invest in. But yeah, just this game, there's so many games that come out, there's so many of them the same genre, and a lot of them have these microtransactions or reward systems or anything to... It's like, do I want to stop what I'm doing in this game and restart over in this game?
Right.
And essentially, that's how I felt about League of Legends for the longest time. Like, if I stop playing League, all that IP, RP, all the skins I bought, all the hours I played, it's just going to go away. So I got to keep playing it. But now I'm like, no, I got to respect my time. And so playing more varied games, going back to WoW again because that has new content, and then stopping when I get bored, and then jumping onto the next game.
Yeah,
and it's just that cycle.
I'm kind of finding that in terms of like the current game game style of things, I'll tend to gravitate between 3 or 4 different multiplayer games that are consistently being updated or are just catching my interest at the time. Usually it's things like Overwatch, World of Warcraft, Guild Wars 2, stuff that still has things going with it. But it, like, in terms of new stuff, I tend to rarely jump on the bandwagon unless there's enough player interest to actually keep going with it. And it is hard. It's extremely hard where you end up in this position where you put so much work into something that you really just can't feel like you can start over in another game because you just lose so much time or you lose so much effort that you put into the other games that it just makes it seem like it's kind of wasted effort.
Right. And I've invested in a couple of MMOs, one of them being Guild Wars 2 and the other one being Rift, and I think Guild Wars I just hired after I kind of saw everything I wanted to see with the game and kind of wanted to move on, which I'm happy about. I can hop back in any time if I feel like it. And then there's Rift, where the game was just so complex and so... There was too much going on that kind of worked against me. They had a lot of quest systems that prevented me from questing and a lot of solo play, which was kind of weird for an MMO where it didn't even let you do some solo play. And so it was just like, all right, so all that time I invested into Rift, the money, the time spent into it, it was just like, ugh. It's like I look back and I kind of cringe, and it's like I don't want seeing a lot of these games turning into that moment of, oh yeah, I remember playing that game, I would like to pick it. Oh no, it's either A, too hard to get back into it, or B, the game's dead.
Well, this is why I don't pick up League of Legends anymore. Plus that, and unfortunately, League also suffers from the problem of one of the most, if not the most, toxic community in any game that I've ever played. Which
followed
is
by Overwatch now.
Yeah, apparently Overwatch is really getting up there. And honestly, I'm kind of noticing a trend here, which is that it seems like a lot of the new multiplayer games that are coming out that have player versus player have started doing things like disabling cross-team chat. Just simply, like, Heroes of the Storm did this, Gigantic did this, a whole bunch of teams did that, and it seems like in terms of the toxicity, it's still there, but it tends to go down and not be as present in the game. So a lot more people are willing to pick it up and stuff like that.
And Heroes of the Storm is one of those games where it's like, you can't even talk to your opponents. So you're going, I'm so mad about this, I hit my keyboard, ow.
Right.
You go into these games, and, like, you can't talk to your opponent, and it's just your allies. And you must be either a real dick, or someone is really pissing you off for being, like, either a troll or just so dumb and ignorant that it forces you to get muted. And, like, I've been rude to people in games. Like, there were some games that, I don't know if you were playing with me, that they were trolling so hard.
I've been in a couple.
It was the guy that, like, kept telling us that he was the playmaker in the group.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's those kind of people that really try so hard to piss people off. They're the ones that probably get muted.
Yeah. Well, and mute functions are there for a reason. I typically don't like turning on mute, simply because I like to hear what my teammates are doing, but at the same time, if a player is just toxic, you just sometimes have to mute them and get it out of the way.
That's when you have them do the slow walk into the abyss and never see them again. Goodbye. So we've been kind of brushing up over and over again. Guild Wars 2, you were saying there's a new expansion coming out. I only learned about this recently, and I have no idea what's about. Tell me more.
Yeah, so the Guild Wars 2 expansion that's coming out is an expansion called Path of Fire, which deals with the god Balthazar returning. He's actually a character that comes from the 6 human gods in the original game, and he's returning to basically destroy the remaining dragons and pit them against each other, but at the same time, because of events that have unfolded, you as a character are trying to actually stop them from killing the dragons, of all things, which are basically the main antagonists within the game. Kind of a surprising twist on things. It was announced a while back, but it didn't really get into things like pre-orders and stuff like that until the beginning of August. And so it hasn't been around, they haven't been previewing it for months. It's just been one of those things where they kind of announced it and said, we're going to do this thing. It's going to continue the story, but at the same time be a standalone expansion. So you can buy it without buying Heart of Thorns, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that you can. And at the same time, it gives you new professions, not new professions, but mostly new elite skills that you can get on various different classes. Each new class is getting a new weapon. They're adding mounts to the game, which is a big plus to that game, since they've got 4 different mounts that do various different things, including go faster, fly across water, jump really high, all that sort of stuff. And you can customize them in terms of their colors and all that sort of stuff to make it look like your own. They're adding a couple of guild halls, adding some new stuff for guilds, but mostly it's going to be story, new large areas going back to the Crystal Desert in Alona, and it should be pretty interesting. I think the key thing, though, that they're going for is they're trying to make it so that you want to buy it because it gives you new stuff and it gives you new things, but at the same time, it's not going to really try and segregate or separate the community anymore. There are going to be certain events and stuff, but things like major events and all that are still more akin to the previous areas that have existed. And so I think it's actually a pretty smart move on their part. Plus, it's also a cheaper expansion comparatively to a lot of other expansions that have come out for various different MMOs. The standard edition is just $30, which is really cheap for a full expansion worth of content.
Right. So one thing that's interesting, anybody who's played most MOBAs, when you talk about mounts, it's like, oh yeah, it's the thing that makes me go faster at level 30. Guild Wars really didn't need a mount system because they had kind of a waypoint system where you could travel instantly from zone to zone from these like kind of like waypoint areas. So them adding a mount system, at first I was like, oh, that's kind of weird, until you mentioned that they're going to be game changers. They're going to be something you want. You're going to get the walk across water, which is super helpful. You're going to be able to, do certain things that normal travel in that game will not do. So that makes it worth, investing time into getting a mount instead of just like, this one shoots fire out of its butt.
Absolutely, but not just that, it also opens up gameplay in terms of like the old content as well, because you'll be able to use the mounts within the old world content. It'll help you get by faster, it'll help you get around even more, and will encourage player exploration. It will encourage people making alts and making new characters because they can move across the areas faster, and it's just overall, I think, a good healthy thing for the gameplay that they're going for.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to kind of see your stream and watch other people play this game, because I'm interested to see how the Elementalist works. I want to see how the Guardian works and all that cool new content. Because one thing I really love about Guild Wars 2 is the stylized like cubes and the kind of tech that they've created for their world.
Yeah, there are a lot of, it's one of the things about Guild Wars 2 that has always impressed me is that their world design is amazing. They have, beautiful scenery. They have very vivid imagery and different types of monsters, different types of characters, very high customization of your own characters. And so while it may not necessarily be a game for everyone, I do think that it is very much a game that's worth at least looking at and giving it a shot.
Right, I definitely gave it a shot. I liked it until I think I got to level 50, and then I spent most of my time PvPing before I kind of just transitioned out. But I think the one major thing that made me stop playing Guild Wars for the longest time was their first real world event, because of how bad it was ran. So there was a one-time event at a certain time, and we were both working.
So yeah, I remember that. So this was, I believe you're talking about the South Sun event, which during that time, it was the Living Story was sort of one of those things where they just sort of added it to the world, and so it was a major world event that happened, but the problem is that it only happened one time. It was never repeated and will never be repeated. But they have since learned from their lessons, and while you can't go back and explore Living Story Season 1 anymore, you do have the ability to catch up on it, and on top of that, all the content from the expansions, Living Story Season 2 and Living Story Season 3 can all be accessed within the game. I do believe that you do have to purchase it if you weren't there for unlocking it, but at the same time, you now have the ability to go back and replay that part of the story so that you can catch up on everything. And the other thing is that unlike games like World of Warcraft where the big rush is to get to level 80 and to get full raid gear and all that sort of stuff, there really isn't that rush in this game. You can kind of go back and do whatever you want, do it in whatever order you want, and just kind of go through the story and enjoy yourself, take it more casually. It's very much much more casual friendly than it is for for people who want more hardcore stuff. But they have also added raids, so there's, sort of a little bit of everything for everyone in there.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm excited to see what's going on with that, but we're going to move on to some of the news that's happened in the past couple of weeks.
Yes.
The first thing I wanted to talk about was the Marvel vs. Capcom Collector's Edition gems.
It looks awful, doesn't it? I mean, it looks terrible. The fact that they didn't actually go with what they said they were going to go with is so upsetting.
For those of you who don't know, if you bought the $200 Marvel vs. Capcom Collector's Edition, it would come with 4 statues, Mega Man X, Chun-Li, Captain Marvel, and Iron Man. Along with that, it was supposed to give you a replica of the 6 Marvel Infinity Gems. And the promotional images showed very bright, very detailed gems that would glow inside of this box. When players started receiving their pre-orders from Amazon and GameStop, they look like eggs.
Yeah.
They look like
painted eggs. They look like somebody smoothed over a stone, painted it, and that was it. There's no shape to them. There's no life to them. They don't look like Infinity Stones. They just look like colored eggs. Like you said, colored eggs, yeah.
Now, if that's what the original image was, and it wasn't a $200, if this was like a $25 set thing you could buy, I wouldn't mind actually having something like that. It's cheap enough, it looks cool, it's one of those kind of like novelty shelf things. But what they were making it out to look like was these were like glass or crystal,
right? And then they were like
objects.
LED backlit, and apparently like the original image was much different than what they showed, what they ended up getting, which is very unfortunate because this is one of those issues of advertising content that isn't what you made it out to be, which is really poor business. I don't actually know how to describe it effectively, but basically it's just not a good thing to do because your player base will dislike you for putting up content that isn't what it's supposed to be.
I've seen this even at my own company and stuff like that. It's where the marketing team gets overzealous with what they want to do, and the rest of the body isn't able to do that for costs, for manpower, for resources and stuff. So probably the marketing team sketched up this really cool looking. It's like, yeah, this is what we're going to do. This is going to be a pre-order. The game dev team's like, oh, that's cool. You got our thumbs up on that. And then when they actually tried to manufacture the stuff, probably the cost to get what they actually wanted was so high. And they're like, shit, we got to get this out to people. What do we do? So they found the cheapest way possible. And it was to cut back on these gems and still have really nice statues. The statues I heard were really nice. And then you got orbs.
Right.
So.
Well, and honestly, I haven't really seen this in terms of collector's editions. Most collector's editions that I've seen for various different games follow through on what they do, and I think that this is like a very disappointing thing. The only other time that I can really think of this happening in a different way, because it wasn't really a collector's issue or collector's edition thing, was when they previewed what was it, Watch Dogs at E3. And then they changed entirely how the graphic settings work and just didn't give it as much detail as it should have. This kind of feels like the real life version of that.
Yeah, that's kind of the closest thing I can remember. I'm not sure about pre-order bonuses. I think the last pre-order bonus fiasco I heard about was the Deus Ex Mankind United,
where it was tiers, right?
It was the tiered system where you had to pre-order and then unlock goodies by the amount of people that pre-ordered. And this was something that Steam tried a while ago, back in the day, and people were so pissed about it that they're like, we're not going to pre-order until the last minute. So
right. Well, that's just a stupid idea to go with in general, because you're trying to get your pre-orders, but people these days are starting to wise up to a lot of pre-orders in general, just simply because it's unknown whether or not the game's going to be worth the money. It's unknown whether or not what you're going to get is going to be worth the money. I wouldn't be surprised if, seeing the way that MVCI or Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, the way that they did this collector's edition release, I wouldn't be surprised if that sort of tarnishes other games' collector's edition releases.
See, the last collector's edition I got was Persona 5. It came with a bag, a plushie, an art book, a CD, a nice box, and what is it? It's a steel box. That's what it was. And I got exactly what I wanted. I was a little disappointed because the music CD was like 12 tracks instead of the whole entire soundtrack, but that was one thing I was disappointed in 8 or 9 thing that I cost like $20 more.
Right.
And so it's cool. Like I have all the stuff in one form or another in use in my room, but yeah, it's like I don't pre-order things unless I know it's a sequel to a game I'm really going to enjoy, or it's something that's just going to blow my socks off.
Yeah,
I don't even pre-order for pre-order bonuses because I do not condone that practice.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of people are starting to get that. Though that being said, collector's editions, depending on the game, can still be a little bit out of control. I think a good example of that was Destiny 2's collector's edition. Apparently, Destiny 2's collector's edition was basically sold out the day it came out. Because just so many people wanted it, but nobody could actually find it, and it's I don't know. It's just one of those things where pre-orders can make sense, but again, like you said, only with games that you're going to want. So I think Destiny 2 was one of those situations where players knew that they wanted that game because Destiny 1 turned out to be a pretty good game at the end.
At the end, yeah, after like 6 DLC packs that should have been main content, but they redeemed themselves in the end because that was one of those games that it was an experiment. It was the first of its kind that Bungie ever did, and now they've learned, and they're going to make Destiny 2 essentially the staple in the series, just like Halo.
So Destiny 2 is, I've heard good things about it now that it's come out, but I've also heard that one of its major problems is they added microtransactions.
Yeah, every game is doing that. I don't know if you heard about the microtransactions in Shadows of War.
Yeah, microtransactions are starting to become one of those things where it's constant in almost every multiplayer game right now, where it's unfortunate, but it is the way that these companies make the most amount of money out of an entire game. But it really sucks when they put microtransactions in games that already cost you full price. That seems a little insane to me, especially since with Destiny you've got not just the full game that you paid for, but the full entire DLC for $40 that you paid for. And it might not even turn out to be the full DLC, because if I remember correctly, the first Destiny, you bought the DLC for the first 2 DLC, and the other parts were sold separately.
Yeah, DLC's getting out of hand. It's being created as an excuse to hold back content, or in one case, we'll just fix it in the DLC later, and then we'll sell the pass before we have any DLC planned. Because I've heard of some things where they sold the DLC, but they never actually said what they had planned for the DLC.
Right.
So, like, Borderlands was like, we have 2 characters, we've got 2 large expansions, and we have a cosmetic pack. Okay, we're not going to tell you what's in it, but there's that. Then you have fighting games. Well, here's going to be 4 characters. You're going to pay for the next 4 characters that come out ahead of time, and they're going to have special costumes if you did the season pass. And then there's some games that are just like, we got a season pass. Yeah, what's on the season pass? Secrets.
Right. Well, you should never base the majority of your game on microtransactions unless you're a free-to-play game. Because if you're a free-to-play game, it makes sense on the aspect of that's the only way you're going to make money, right? You have no other forms of making money. But when you're a full-priced game and you're paying for it, and on top of that, you're paying for DLC is not part of the original price, it seems very scummy to make you pay for content that should have already been in the game. In Destiny 2, it's like things like color shaders and
one-time use
images
effects.
And right, exactly, or stuff that you can use over time and all that sort of stuff. But honestly, it's stuff that you should be able to unlock anyway. So at least on some aspects, it's cosmetic. But especially in MMOs, cosmetics are important.
Yes. WoW learned that a little too late in its lifespan, but once you're able to make your character like personalized towards you, that makes such a huge difference, because that no longer becomes generic face 5, shoulder 4, butt 3, leg 2, skin color X.
Right.
It's like, no, this is my character now. He wears this suit of armor, he wears this weapon, this armor, he has this haircut. The more you can customize your character, the more the character stops being every other character with the same generic type and start becoming your own. And that's one of the things that I love about my WoW character, is because no one rocks the armor I rock.
Right.
It's just one of those things. It's like you see me walking down the street, like that's me. I've never seen anybody else in the same armor set.
Right. So, but that's just my take on things. But in terms of the Marvel vs. Capcom thing, I think it's kind of crappy that they did that. Going back circle to the news there. It's just one of those things where it's very unfortunate, and I feel bad for the people who paid for a product that they didn't get. But at the same time, it just seems like these days that's the type of risk you pay for these sorts of things.
It could be worse.
Yeah.
It could be you pre-ordering a Nintendo Classic and then getting your pre-order canceled 3 days before it comes out.
Don't even get me started with it. So we've got a friend of ours who goes by the name Kenny, and she actually works for one of the places that sells the NES stuff and all that sort of stuff. Apparently, their store only got 5 in. Like legitimately, they only got 5, and it's just one of those things where that's unacceptable. When you've got a product that people want to pay for and people want to buy, that's just awful.
GameStop, Target, Walmart, and Amazon, they were only given whatever Nintendo wanted. Nintendo is the one holding back the production and keeping it from, reaching as many people as they possibly can. They have a treasure trove of money that they can get from this. They're making the worst possible decision. They're doing the same thing they did with Amiibos, where they're holding back the shipments, and then they're like, oh, we're going to ask for all these pre-orders. We want you to, get interested now, and then they'll send as little as possible. They finally realize that they can make money off of this because they're re-putting both the NES and the SNES classics onto reproduction lines, and they're going to have more out by February 2018, so more people can finally buy them. But at this point, I'd rather emulate and save my money or buy everything off other markets. I can get them from their eShops or one of those, was it Mall 50 games in one consoles?
Well, they think what they're doing is they're being smart by basically making it so that it costs more money, it's more rare, people will want it more and all that sort of stuff. But honestly, this doesn't help them, mostly because of 2 reasons. One is the people who are going to make money off of this are the people who
Scalpers.
get in. Yeah, they're going to get pre-orders. They're going to scalp it for 3 or 4 times the cost of what it actually is, and then they're going to take all that money, and Nintendo's not going to get any of it. And the second thing is that they're going to piss off their fan base because people want to have these things, and if they can't get them, they're going to find some way to get the games that they want, and that means pirating, which is very unfortunate because they could, just as easily make more of these, and they don't, and it makes absolutely no sense in terms of a business standpoint.
I am a person who goes out of their way to not pirate a game unless I cannot support the developer. That's I get shit on both sides of the spectrum of, it's like, why do you do that? It's free. You're not hurting anybody. Or like, oh, come on. Like you pirate if you can't get to it. It's like, so for example, if there is a game that a studio is no longer existing, they will not be able to earn money from that. And sites like GOG or Steam do not have the game available. And there is a way to play the game. I will pirate the game. No one is being hurt. No one is losing money. It's an archive game that has been essentially abandoned.
Right, now, you can't find it anywhere else. I mean, the fact is that at that point, the only way to play it is to pirate it. There is no other way of playing it.
Right. Now, if it's a game that I can pay for in a way, shape, or form, and it's too expensive for me, I'm not going to take the cheap way out and pirate, because at the end of the day, that will prevent future purchases of that kind of item or that same thing in particular, and no one will ever make more of it. So I'm not going to be part of the reason why certain things never exist again, because I was too cheap to buy something that I didn't rightfully earn. Now, people think I'm like, oh, it's just one person won't do it, but if everybody has the mentality, it adds up really quickly. And so it's a weird code of honor I have. Like, if I play a free-to-play game within the time I would play a normal $60 game, I'll throw money into that game.
Yeah, well, at that point, you played it so much that it's worth your time. That's what I did with Gigantic, which is they had a pack for $30 to buy all the characters and all future upcoming characters. And it was just like, I played this game for probably about 100 hours now, which is way more than I would get out of the vast majority of single-player games. Why not throw down $30 for it?
Why not pay the bills of the people that worked really hard to make that game?
Right.
I'm in a free-to-play industry as well. It's like, people complain that, we nickel and dime and everything has a value to it and stuff like that. It's like, none of that is... If you enjoy the game, support us. Like, don't get mad when we're actually trying to make a living and do things that might tempt you to pay. We're never forcing that down your throat. Well, but at the same time, it's like, I work my ass off daily to make this game free and it's accessible, and you can play it 100% without paying. It just takes a little bit of your time.
Right.
So,
and this almost circles back to the whole microtransactions in full-priced games, though. But I guess it's probably don't want to harp on that. Probably don't want to harp on that too much.
Yep.
So.
Speaking of free-to-play games, we're not going to go into the free-to-play aspect, but another news article I found this week is Epic accidentally allowed Xbox and PS4 players to crossplay in Fortnite. It only happened for about 2 hours this week, but it was kind of interesting to see that the tech was so easily activated.
I think a lot of people were expecting the technology for this sort of stuff. I think a lot of people are actually under the impression that the reason that it doesn't exist is, for one, that they don't want it to exist, but for two, that the technology was not available for it. I don't think anybody actually thought it was literally just flip a switch and it works, which brings up a lot of questions as to why this doesn't become more common of a thing. In what you showed me, it seems like what it talks about is that particularly Sony doesn't like doing it because they say that it's for marketing reasons. They say that it's because their shareholders don't really want that. But at the same time, player bases really love that sort of stuff, unless it's a PvP game. There are some exceptions. With PvP games, it's probably not a good idea to put, like, for instance, PC players with controller players. There's a level of unfairness that keyboard and mouse gets over controllers every time.
Right.
But in terms of games like this, Fortnite, where it's mostly, or I believe it's entirely a PvE game where you work together with other people.
They actually added a PlayerUnknown survival recently, and that's actually where this issue happened, was in that game. People were noticing players with unconventional names walking around from the other servers. So,
and it's just one of those things of, like, it makes more sense to allow these players to play with each other, but at the same time, in terms of a business, it's kind of hard to say, because if you allow Xbox to play with PS4 players, that means that people aren't going to buy a PS4 when they could have, or people aren't going to buy an Xbox when they could have. I think that as a player is a very sad thing to hear, because, we don't want to necessarily hear that. We want to be able to play with our friends no matter what we're playing on. We want to be able to work together and have fun together and all that sort of stuff. At the same time, on the business aspect, it is unfortunately a smart idea for them to do, where it comes down to they make more money off of it that way because more people buy their consoles.
Yeah. I feel that it's all totally off archaic principles and, businessmen in suits not realizing the full potential of gaming. And yes, if you can support cross-platform play, it won't be because... it's like, oh, I don't... Like, yes, you got Call of Duty games. Now that it doesn't matter what console you have, it's going to encourage people to buy more games. Buying more games means buying more consoles, more people get games. You're creating this kind of, like, network of gaming. Yes, you can still have your exclusives. That's what's going to bring people from one side to another. That's what you want to focus on. You want to focus on your personal tech, your exclusives, and any sort of additional bonuses that you can bring alongside, like your PlayStation Plus, your Xbox Live. But just, like, if you give the studios the power to determine or not if they want their games to be cross-platform, even with, like, PC shouldn't have to have its own say in things. It's like, if you want to hook it up to PC, just do PC. I know games like Hex is going to go onto PS4 and they're going to have cross-platform play. I know that games like Final Fantasy XIV have cross-platform play. It's one of those things where it's like, why stop progress? Because
right.
Business.
Well, I mean, like I said, it's one of those things where they do make a lot of money off of that. I do think that it's very narrow-sighted in terms of, the bigger community you have, the more that you can get out of it and the longer that it'll last. So, I think that in some respects, especially since you have to pay for services, for instance, things like PS Plus or pay for Xbox Live or all that sort of stuff, it makes more sense ultimately to allow players to do this. But it's hard to say in the short run, right? Because, like I said, they want people to buy their consoles. They want people to actually go through and do this sort of thing. And if they allow cross-platforming, they won't do that. So it's hard to say. in terms of who's right in this situation. I do wish, though, like as a player, that we could do cross-platforming stuff. One of the things that I was really hoping for when Destiny 2 came out was I was really hoping for a PvE cross-platform play, like being able to play on PC and play with my friends who are on PS4 or play with my friends who are on Xbox. I would have really loved that sort of thing. PvP separate, but at least PvE together. And unfortunately, that sort of stuff just, it doesn't seem to really ever happen, and if it does, it's very rare, and only in certain circumstances.
Yeah, it's one of those things where someone who actually works in that kind of like section of the industry can explain more of why, you know, like cross-platform play doesn't work, like server tech for a studio or a company that, you know, is buying from one of the two major industries or something like that. But
well, I do have to admit, the interesting conversation that comes out of this, though, is that it almost seems like that excuse of, you know, it's too difficult to do is almost negated by this sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
The fact that it just accidentally happened, the fact that they flipped on a switch and people from Xbox and PS4 were playing together. I mean, it sort of seems like one of those things where they could do it and they could build it in, they just don't, mainly for marketing reasons, mainly for money reasons.
Mm-hmm. It's BS. I think it's a lot of top men who control the systems, control the power on that.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do until they wake up. And unfortunately, I'm going to be a little xenophobic to some, but I think Japanese culture and Japanese like businessmen and anybody at that high position, they're sheltered from, you know, trying something different, for like cooperating with other businesses and actually thinking outside the box. They're still stuck in like 80s culture of business, and you see that in Nintendo, you see that in a lot of Japanese studios, even like Square Enix and stuff, who is progressive, still do a lot of things that you're kind of like, that's why? That makes no sense.
Yes and no. I don't know how much of it is, again, a cultural thing or a business thing. I'd probably put it up more towards business than cultural, but at the same time, I do think, you know, going back to that it's kind of one of those things of, you know, it seems to only work in the short run. In the long run, I think that they'll be better off if they start allowing these cross-platform things, just simply because it means more people play for longer and more people buy into it.
Right. But moving on to other topics that have interested us. Hearthstone. Usually I don't talk about Hearthstone on here, but there's a kind of deck that has been pissing a lot of people off on competitive play that has made me laugh really hard, and that is the Hearthstone Warrior Dead Man's Hand. Do you know anything about
Fatigue Warriors? So I've watched, you know, Hearthstone for years and years and years. I've not really been an active player in it because I put so many years into Magic the Gathering that I just couldn't bring myself to really play any other card games after that. But the thing is that in terms of this sort of stuff, I do tend to watch it on Twitch. I will watch YouTube videos and all that sort of stuff. And so it's the whole thing of like Fatigue Warrior, Fatigue Mage, you know, or Mill Mage or any of that sort of stuff. Like, none of this is particularly new, right? But this idea of Dead Man's Hand, where so the card itself is one of those cards where you play it and it shuffles your hand back into your deck. And if you in some weird way with the way it works together is that if you have both of the Dead Man's Hand or Dead Man's Hand cards in your hand, if you shuffle one in or shuffle both in, you basically can continue to do it infinitely. And so the biggest problem is that while they did change things like the rope to make turns shorter, and they did change it, they have these series where when you fatigue, you end up taking damage for each additional card that you draw that you can't draw. But in this case, because you keep shuffling it back in, it potentially allows for people to hit the 80, or I think it was like a 90 turn limit, and can stall out games or tie games, in fact, which is, honestly, I have to admit, kudos to the players for figuring this thing out. That's super cool. I do think that they should probably change it, though, because it does, unfortunately, while it's cool that players have figured out how these things work together, it does go against, in some respects, the sportsmanship, the style of game that they're going for.
So the problem is with you're talking about sportsmanship. This has been the most successful way to counter the current strong arm deck, which is the Druid token deck, which is so fast, so powerful, and a lot of the other decks in the current standard format can't compete with it. So the only way to compete with it is to play this deck and have a higher success of beating the really easy to play and really simple token deck. So they have to resort to this mill deck that is just insane and slow, and it just breaks the entire ranked system.
Which normally though, that this would be fair in the aspect of when you hit fatigue, you take damage, right? The idea was that you shouldn't ever be able to continuously draw. You should be taking damage over time based on the amount of cards that you've lost or no longer have to draw. But the problem with this is that if you end up in a situation where two of the same deck are faced against each other, they literally can stall out for the entire maximum of the game, which could potentially go on for hours. And it's... Like I said, it's cool that they figured this out, and it's cool that it works, but because of this, it also seems like it's something that they have to change simply because you can't have games like that going on for hours and hours just to end in a tie, especially not on the tournament stage.
Even in the tournament stage, they actually had to make a rule about if they go to that 90-turn limit or they get to that point, it's whoever has the most health and armor. So it's just like, well, I guess it's just going to keep hitting that armor button now. Just keep, oh, it looks like I got more health. I win this one.
Right, and so it's... The problem is, though, that basically... So the cards are only 30 cards, so you end up with basically less than 30 turns in a typical game. Or maybe if you hit fatigue, you start ending up with upwards of 35, 40 turns. Which means that literally half the game with these two decks facing each other, or with these copy decks facing each other, is them doing essentially nothing, right? It's them doing their, maybe adding armor, they're shuffling their hand back in, but that's it. They're not doing anything, and it becomes boring and stale, and especially if this becomes the meta. It's one thing if somebody brought this deck and it's just one player that's doing this. Fine. But if it's everyone that's doing this because it's the best deck, this game's going to go downhill really quickly.
It's already gone downhill because they don't think ahead as far as what cards are going to work well with each other, and they've been desperately on the fly having to nerf cards and change cards that have been around since the start of the game because they're adjusting to these new sets that are coming out. The biggest issue is one of the base cards for Druids is called Innervate. 0 cost. When you play, you get 2 crystals of mana for that turn, and then they go away. They nerfed it to essentially reduce to 1. Now, that was a big staple for Druids for the longest time, but now they had to change it not because of one card in the future set, it's because a whole mechanic they came up with, and they didn't have the foresight to see what's going on. And a lot of games like Magic the Gathering and even the World of Warcraft trading card game had a quality assurance team that would see and they would review and look at cards and prevent a lot of these major issues from happening, but Blizzard isn't at that stage yet to really think ahead.
I will give them, points on this, which is that they have 2 advantages here. One is that they have it's an online game. It's completely on the computer, and so they can actually have the ability to go back and change cards. Unlike Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or those sorts of things where it's all printed cards, or the vast majority is printed cards, and because of that, they can't go back and actually change the text on them to make it safe. The other thing is that they do sometimes, but typically it doesn't work out, or they have to reprint it in a different set with different wording on it, right? But the other thing is, I will give them this, which is that Magic the Gathering, even these big card games have faced similar problems, right? You've had Magic the Gathering where you've had cards that were literally banned while they were still in current set. Look at Skullclamp, which was a really old card that was banned because of the way that it interacted with cards during that set that basically gave people an extreme unfair advantage that basically allowed them to win like turn 2 or 3 that was much faster than any other deck around. Another one that is banned in basically every game type, I think every game type in Magic the Gathering, is Jace Mind Sculptor.
Yep.
That card is way overpowered for what it should be, and it breaks the game straight up. And so, and I won't necessarily go into the details of what these cards do or how they interact, just in the simple aspect of, they got banned simply because they were so powerful. And so it's not like these other companies are infallible, right? They make go and do all that sort of stuff. And I think Hearthstone is sort of at an advantage if they fix it fast enough, right? If they go out of their way to see what the problem is and be able to fix it, or make it so that Dead Man's Hand, for instance, can't shuffle itself back in, that would solve the problem, right? And they can go back and change it to make it so that these cards do that, so that these cards can adapt to the format accordingly, and they can change it accordingly to what they see players coming up with. Because sometimes, even with quality assurance things and all that sort of stuff, you just can't predict how players are going to make these cards work.
One thing that Blizzard and other card games that really require the use of changing text is players aren't going to like that when they buy a card or they invest real-world money to get a card to be competitive, and then the card is nerfed. Now, like Wizards of the Coast and other card games have to really consider that before they ban a card from a format. They have to take into consideration if there's other cards that are worth less or other ways that they can change the format without having to ban a card outright. And so, in a digital format, if you keep changing cards over the time of the game, like, if I invest so much time into a set to get all the cards I need for this deck, and then they just decide to start shifting the text on these cards and not outright banning them, it's like, that's not what I paid for originally, and if I keep investing in this game, what else is going to change? So that's a tool that they're really going to have to use lightly. And they've used it a lot this year, and I think that they're going to have to start toning it back before they really understand card balance. They can't use that as their first tool.
It is just kind of the nature of these things, though, at the same time. And the thing is that it's never that you necessarily don't get your money's worth, especially in a game where, with Hearthstone, while it is strongly advised that you probably put some money into it, you can play this game free to play. You can entirely get every card without paying real money for it, as long as you play enough and as long as you're good enough to do it. I've seen multiple people be able to do that. Mostly they tend to be professionals, to be fair, but it is entirely possible. And on the other side of that, it just comes down to, I'd rather see them balance these sorts of things where they didn't necessarily see it happen than just let it slide, right? Because if you end up letting these sorts of things slide, even though it was your fault that they went in the first place, you didn't necessarily predict how it was going to happen. It could have been probably more quality assessed better, but it's one of those things of, I think that they're just doing what they can to keep up with things and to update it, and players just kind of have to deal with that, because that's how balance works in these games. Yeah. You have to kind of get into a mindset where what you're paying for may not necessarily be specifically what you're going to get forever, right? But that's honestly the nature of multiplayer games in general. We were talking earlier about the whole thing of, putting into a game that you're not sure will last, right? It's the same circumstance where you sort of put into a game and you may not expect it to last the way that you want it to, especially in MMOs, especially in card games like this. You just gotta kind of have to deal with it.
Yeah, I'm just curious to see how things are going to go and what the next set brings for Hearthstone, because they're entering the third year of standard play after the year of the Mammoth, so they're going to be removing a bunch of sets and opening up, I think, like 4 more sets for next year. But we'll see. BlizzCon's coming up in a month, and they usually drop a set at that point in time, so we'll see what they have planned.
Yeah, we will. It's always interesting to see them, release new stuff and to see how players interact with the new cards. So we're looking forward to it in the future.
Yeah, we'll have to do some sort of BlizzCon watching party when it comes out in a couple of months.
Oh, yeah. I'm looking forward to like the arena tournaments for World of Warcraft. Looking forward to the announcements. I'm not sure. I've heard that they're not announcing anything for Overwatch in terms of new character. But
No, they dump everything usually at Gamescom, strangely enough. They just did that
yeah.
for Here's the Storm, too. They're just kind of like, Gamescom's where we're going to announce stuff. It's like, why?
So I have no idea. They might drop stuff in terms of like the future of World of Warcraft. Since they didn't talk about an expansion there, they might talk about an expansion at BlizzCon. Maybe that's really what they were just why it didn't happen at Gamescom, and they're just saving up for it. It's entirely possible that we'll hear about other things. I think there was something I've heard rumors and various different things about them talking on a Diablo style MMO or Diablo 4, but obviously that's sort of a pipe dream for now until they actually say something.
It's really interesting because if you look at what they are promoting for this year's BlizzCon, or was it Digital Ticket, the digital goodie bag is currently just the mounts you get for World of Warcraft, and the mounts are very generic.
Right.
There is no icons hinted at. They haven't talked about anything for Diablo, Overwatch, or Here's the Storm, or even StarCraft, because they're gonna be big announcements, and they're gonna tie in on what they want to announce at BlizzCon. So they've got some stuff in the can, and they just don't want to give it away yet.
Yeah, they've got big stuff going on. I'm sure I've heard that they're working on a new IP in general, and it's just one of those things where it might also just turn out to be a small year for them, or it might turn out to be a year where there's not a lot of big announcements, which, to be fair, is not necessarily a bad thing for Blizzard, considering that Blizzard has been announcing new big things for like the last 4 or 5 years straight. I mean,
not really. It's been an on and off year. The last big drop that they put down was the year I went to BlizzCon, and that was Overwatch.
Right.
That was when Warlords of Draenor, and then they announced Legion at Gamescom, and then they just kind of followed up. I think this year's the year that they're gonna at least have 2 big mic drop moments. I feel.
It's entirely possible. We can sort of guess based on it, but at the same time, I think that it might be one of those years where they're going to say, we've got a lot of stuff in the pipes, we've got a lot of stuff that we're working on, but there's nothing major coming out. I think the only thing major they're probably going to talk about is potentially the future after patch 7.3 or 7.3.5 for World of Warcraft, just simply because we need to know where it's going. Well, and a lot of players have pointed out the fact that if you count up how they've released their patches, every single patch from the release of Legion has been 77 days after the last one, like every time. And so a lot of people were sort of expecting at Gamescom that was when they were going to announce the next expansion, because they only talked about Argus being a one-patch thing. So we're already fairly sure that Argus, I believe they've already said that Argus is going to be like the last part of Legion. But since we've only got like a limited amount of time based on that profile, unless we go into 7.4, we're going to have to see a new expansion at some point in the nearby future, right?
7.4 is probably going to be the storyline patch to tie into the next expansion, which everybody's saying is going to be the hunt for Jaina Proudmoore and her home city of Kel'Thuzad, I think. And
yeah, they've been saying stuff based on some of the data mine stuff that they've had with like the Kel'Thuzad starter set and stuff like that. So it's very possible we'll see something like that.
She's also key art. They've put a lot more skins into Heroes of the Storm. They're putting a lot more focus onto Jaina right now, just kind of subvertedly in all sorts of other properties. So you never know, she might actually be a Dreadlord. I'm cool with that.
I'm pretty sure, though, in the game she's not. I think they've gone through so many lengths of saying that she's not a Dreadlord.
Here's the Storm canon. It's canon in a game, and I say so.
We're going to go to, what is it, the Warlords of Wrath of the Lich King.
Oh, God.
Where they turn out that, it's the alternate timeline where they actually are Lich Lords and stuff like that.
Oh, good. Because we need more Draenor lore.
Right? Just what we needed.
But that pretty much wraps up all the stuff we wanted to talk about. If you have any comments and stuff you want to talk about with any of the topics we talked about, please leave it in the comment section down below, and we'll talk about it in the next episode. I want to thank Belier once again for coming onto the show this week. What's your Twitch?
My Twitch is twitch.tv/BelTheSheep, BL, just simple like that. And you can find me on Twitch at Monday through Friday, currently at 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Mountain Time, or 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Pacific Time. The times might be changing soon, just simply because I've got some things in the works, but at the same time, that's currently where you can find me right now.
Awesome, and all that will be in the doobly-doo down below. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any comments, questions, concerns about the show, please leave them down below. Check out our Patreon, spasticgaming.com/Patreon, as well as our Facebook page, again, all linked down below. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Water Elemental.
And this is Belier.
And I don't have a good outro yet. This is only the second episode.
You'll figure something out.
Eventually.
Alright, see you later, guys.